Welcome to this week's xConnect Northwest, connecting you to the experts. I'm your host, Greg Mills, and the music we were just listening to was Ann Yasinitsky. She was rehearsing one of her performances for the WSU Festival of Contemporary Art Music. And joining us today is Dr. Ryan Hare from the WSU School of Music. He's the director of the WSU Festival of Contemporary Art Music and a composer as well. And we'll have a chance to listen to the performance of a piece composed and performed by students a little bit later in the show as well, and we'll talk about that. Before we get going, just a reminder that you at home can get involved in our conversation at any time with your questions. All you have to do is connect with us on Twitter at NWPTV. You can use the hashtag xConnectNW. On Facebook, search Northwest Public Television, or by email at kwsutv@wsu.edu. Dr. Hare, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Well, thanks. It's my pleasure.
It's post-festival for you.
It is.
So that has to be a big relief to a certain degree. A lot of work goes into the festival here at Washington State University.
Yes, it certainly does.
Let's start by having you really round out a description from your point of view of really what the festival is about, and well, let's just talk about that. Just tell me what the festival's about, and we'll dig into some of the specifics as we go.
Sure. Well, it's fundamentally about the art music that is written in our time by composers who are our friends and colleagues and peers. And it focuses on what they're following. These composers follow more or less in the classical tradition as we know it. But they have something that is special for what life is like now. What does it mean to live in 2015 America?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit different than, say, a festival of music by Bach or Mozart or whomever, music that's very old. And it's different also than, say, commercial music or pop music or rock and roll.
Right.
In a fairly kind of arbitrary distinction, but I think it's somewhat an important one. And that is that commercial music, for the most part, is geared toward creating a product that sells. Yeah. And there's no, I have to emphasize, there's no arbitrary dividing line. There's no clear dividing line between classical or art music and commercial music. I have to emphasize that point.
Okay.
Commercial music can be very artistic and art music can be very commercial. Right?
Fair enough.
Okay, but the idea is that on the art music side is more art for art's sake, more about the subjective experience of the composer, personal, emotional, expressive point of view that composer brings. And it's also tends to be more about adventure, exploring new territory, trying something new, trying something different. But anyway, the idea is that there are still composers among us who write music for art's sake kind of music. Yeah. And this is a festival to celebrate what they do.
So if you are an art musician or an art composer, as you're talking about, are you drawing from similar bodies of work just as a commercial composer would be drawing from, sort of in the same way? Or is there, I would guess there would be a little bit more, or maybe a lot more freedom to what you're doing, because you're not gearing it toward commercial sales, which puts you in probably a much smaller box. But I also have to think that there are influences of other art musicians, contemporary art musicians, that influence the musicians and the composers. Is that safe to
Absolutely.
To assume?
Yeah, and again, there's sort of an arbitrary distinction.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to. It blends together.
It's music.
And sometimes there are composers and musicians who you can't. They're in somewhere in the middle, and you wouldn't want to split hairs there. Yeah. And I am, as a composer myself, I am a product of the late 19th and early. The late 20th and the early 21st centuries, and that includes pop music, rock and roll, jazz, blues, everything, country and western. That's all part of music I've listened to and that affects me. And some composers draw on contemporary commercial styles more than others.
Okay.
So it's fairly arbitrary distinction, but again, the idea is that it would be potentially, trying to set out in a new direction, or to try something that maybe comes from a place that we know very well, but heads somewhere new, takes it in a little bit different direction. Of course, commercial music does this too. So again, it's a bit of an arbitrary distinction. Yeah. I guess the other important distinction, of course, most art music, what you call contemporary classical, contemporary art music, is still using traditional instruments, mostly acoustic instruments.
Okay. So that separates it. Are there styles within styles? Can you break out the different types of contemporary art music?
You bet.
Maybe you can help me with that a little bit.
Well, that's one of the interesting features of things that happened in the 20th century. Sort of what we call classical music and what most people think of, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms. They belong to a tradition that we call the common practice tonal period. And there's sort of a lot of what we understand about harmony and melody and rhythm and so on is all in that tradition. And there's a fairly unified sort of body of expectations that go with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not a universal set of expectations. Other traditions in the world can be really different. But one of the things that happened in the 20th century, especially in the early 20th century, was a massive movement away from those traditions in all kinds of exciting directions. Claude Debussy said, "There are no rules, pleasure is the only law." And it was definitely saying, I'm going to find my own vocabulary, my own sounds. I'm going to do it really what I want to do, and never mind those German guys like Brahms or Wagner, and I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
All right, and so that's the legacy of the 20th century. I mean, basically, in this huge split. Now, instead of being a common body of work, there's a lot of different composers doing different things. In fact, that becomes sort of the expectation that every composer defines for themselves a specific language, specific style, which could be more conservative, more like tradition, or radically far from it.
Okay.
You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What is it? Can you point your finger at what draws you to it, or maybe what originally drew you to it? You're into it, you know, pretty deep now. So.
Oh yes, that's for sure. Well, the piece that really, I guess, set me on the path of being interested in this was Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Okay. And of course, that piece is now over 100 years old. So it's like, well, how modern is that? Okay, but in its day, it was very modern, and it was one of the pieces that really has become iconic for this shift away from common practice tonality. And, you know, a shift into something new, and the expectation that a composer is going to create something very daring and individual. And so that piece, of course, I had that experience with that piece when I heard it. It's like, this is the most crazy, amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. I think a lot of people, when they hear that piece for the first time, will have that experience. It's amazing and great, and it's not like anything that was before, or not much like. And of course, yeah, it's 100 years old. But the thing about it is that the idea of the spirit of daring, of adventure, of finding music in sounds that maybe are not expected to be musical, because they're not traditionally musical sounds. I would say that was part of what maybe the main thing that attracted me to that. Okay. You know, thinking that, hey, I can sort of invent something new here that might be really awesome and beautiful in a way that no one expected. You know, finding unexpected beauty in sounds that no one thought was ever beautiful before. I mean, that's an amazing idea, right? And it's not really new to the 20th century, by the way. I mean, there have been daring composers throughout history, even within the common practice tonal period, who did things that were so daring that people wasn't certain it was really music or was what music should be. Beethoven got a lot of flack, actually, for that sort of thing, for just being in his vocabulary very daring. So this is not really new, but there's something about the variety, the diversity of vocabularies that is really enjoyable and very interesting. And I guess the idea that of creating a very personal musical language. Of course, there's a downside. Yeah. The downside being that
there's always a downside.
There's always a downside. Excuse me. The broader public may have to do a little bit more work to get to know what your personal style is, right? So Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, when it was premiered, famously caused a riot in Paris. And, you know, because people just couldn't believe what they were hearing. And some people loved it, some people hated it, and they got fights over it. It was crazy. And so that's the downside, is that it puts you in a category of where it's not immediately obviously appealing to people, to some people. To me, people especially who want, and there's nothing wrong with this, but a lot of people in music sort of want things that are very familiar. They want to hear the tunes that they've heard before. They want to be comforted. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly legit thing to expect of music.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, there is a place where it can be daring and challenging and exciting for those reasons.
Yeah. Well, let's hear some.
Sure.
last Thursday, a tuba ensemble. Quickly, who is this, and how do we properly tell who they are?
Well, that is a composition by Austin Matthews.
Okay.
And he is an undergraduate composition major, and he's a student of mine. And he himself is a euphonium tuba player. So euphonium is sort of like a small tuba.
Yeah.
I'll save a complicated definition for another time, but
Fair
for
enough.
now that will do.
All right.
So the tuba euphonium quartet has become a fairly standardized ensemble with 2 euphoniums and 2 tubas. And so Matthew, his music in a lot of ways really comes from a tradition of brass music, especially brass music that emphasizes euphony and a sort of a blended harmony that the brass instruments are very suited to create.
Okay, let's try it. Let's hear it. Well, Dr. Hare, that was a performance that was from last Thursday for us today on the show. Tell me, as a composer and a musician, do you lean one way or the other as to what's more pleasing to you? Do you spend more time on one or the other? I hate to direct the question too much, but I think you probably know how you'd answer it.
So by musician, you mean performer?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I do.
I like to say
let's do that. Let's put it in the.
Are also musicians.
Fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, I am a professional bassoonist as well as a composer.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say. They love them differently.
Mm-hmm.
All my degrees, academic degrees, are in composition.
Okay.
But I kept playing all through college, and I had my first professional gig at 18. So I love the bassoon, you know, and I can never imagine not playing. Okay. So it's really impossible to choose. I know I get asked this question, and how do I choose? I don't know.
You don't. It sounds
I guess I don't choose. And actually, that's what's happened. I'm a professor of bassoon, and I'm a professor of composition, and that's just the way it is. So I guess I've had the luxury of not being forced to choose.
All right. Well, so much to talk about. Thanks a lot for joining us on the show today.
Really my pleasure.
And congratulations on the festival.
Thank you.
Well, that puts the curtain down on xConnect Northwest today. Thanks to Ryan for joining us, and thank you at home for helping us. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Now remember, you can stay connected with us all week by tweeting us, liking us on Facebook, adding us to your circle on Google+, or emailing us at kwsutv@wsu.edu. Send us your show ideas too. We'd love to hear from you. If you miss any part of today's show, we will have it available online at nwptv.org. You can also watch extra performances of the WSU Contemporary Art Festival on our website. xConnect Northwest is off next week in observance of President's Day. Join us February 23rd. We're going to have Dr. Sue Kitchell with us again. We'll talk about how to keep our pets safe from some early season bugs this year. She'll join us live from our Pullman studios at 2:30. If you have questions feel free to connect with us online. Again, thanks to the WSU School of Music for allowing us to go inside and see what it takes to put on a festival like this one. I'm Greg Mills. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on air and online.